Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the Allergan Limitless Women's Leadership Podcast Series. We are grateful to Allergan for their unwavering support of this important initiative. This podcast series is dedicated to providing you with real-life stories of women in leadership who are tackling gender-related hurdles, large and small. The stories and topics covered will be as diverse as the group of women we represent. My name is Ashley Amalfi, and I am a board-certified plastic surgeon at the Quatela Center for Plastic Surgery in Rochester, New York, and I will be your host today. The theme of Season 1 is finding personal balance. Balance is such a tricky word because we are never truly balanced. It's more of a give and take between the demands of our careers as working women and the fulfillment we need in our personal lives. And that's what we're going to discuss here today. No families look alike, and there's so much more to finding that balance than the traditional family structure that we always talk about. My guest today is a living and thriving example of a diverse family, and I'm so excited to have her here to share her story. I would like to welcome Dr. Anureet Bajaj, a highly accomplished plastic surgeon in private practice in Oklahoma City. Dr. Bajaj, welcome.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
I'm so excited for you to share your story. I feel like you've been, as a female plastic surgeon, an incredible mentor and role model to me. But every time we talk, you continue to get more and more interesting. There's just so much about you that I don't know, and that in preparing for this, I've learned about you, and I'm so grateful. And I think the audience is going to be so grateful for you to share your story. So again, thank you so much for being so open and honest.
I'm ready when you are, Ashley.
So let's dive in. I mean, we said not all families look alike, and every family is totally different. And I feel like I come from a very straightforward, husband, wife, girl, boy, kind of cookie cutter family. And that is not the way that it always is. And it's just so fulfilling to hear about all these different stories. So I would love for you to just start from the beginning and tell us a little bit more about your family structure and what your normal looks like.
So I'm 52 years old, and I got married when I was 40, and I met my husband on a blind date, and he had 4 boys. So I have a family with my husband, and we have 4 human children and then 3 dogs. So our family's a blended family in every sense of the word. We've been married for almost 12, 13 years. And to be honest, the way that our family has worked or has been successful is my husband has always been kind of the quote unquote house husband, if you will. He is a teacher. And so when we were married and the boys were young, he was the primary person who took the kids everywhere, went to all the games and things like that. And even now, for example, he's cooking dinner, and more nights than not, he is the one who cooks dinner. I don't.
Right. It's a perfect balance, though, because sometimes when you have a crazy career as a woman, you need to have someone at home who is able to balance you. And we have sort of a similar situation. My husband's an academic, so it's kind of nice because he doesn't have this incentive to go and work so much. And so he can leave early and be downstairs with the kids, just like you said, and just be more of that stay at home kind of force that's behind us and propelling us to be as successful as we are.
I think it's critical to have that degree of balance, because I don't think that I would have been able to focus on my career to the same level that I have over the past 10 years if I hadn't had his support and the ability for him to create the home. Like he has really, he creates the home life, right? He takes care of people, and he says he enjoys taking care of people, and that's what he does for his family.
What kind of things do you think it's helped you do in your career? I mean, I know like when we get home from work and we're super involved in the societies, and I know that you are intimately involved in the leadership of the Aesthetic Society and also the ASPS, that's almost like a second job for us. When you get home, there's calls and emails and Zoom meetings and podcasts like this. And if you were coming home and taking care of a family of kids and you were expected to do it all, I don't know how you would have time for that. So do you feel like it's allowed you to kind of pursue that sort of leadership aspect of your career more?
Oh, absolutely. And he's encouraged me to pursue that leadership aspect and to go on trips. And it gives me the opportunity, I was a visiting professor for the PSF and I was able to do that and travel. And was traveling once a month easily for a long weekend for that whole year. And so it's without the ability to have someone else to hold the fort down and watch the dogs and the kids, it would have been impossible to do all of those things.
Do you guys have like detailed conversations about those sorts of things? Like where there like sit downs like, hey, I want to do these things, but that means more work is going to fall on you. And I mean, did you guys have discussions or did that just kind of organically, you guys assume those roles?
It just organically fell into place, to be honest.
Yeah, mine did not.
It just became a matter of who had time to do things, right?
Yeah.
And at the beginning, when we first got married, I used to take the dogs to doggy daycare and then I'd have late days and I wouldn't be able to pick them up. And then eventually it just became Trevor who takes the dogs to doggy daycare and picks them up, right? So
Right. I think that's kind of happened in our household a little bit too, but I also like frequently will ask my husband, hey, I want to get involved in X, Y, or Z, and this is what the commitment's going to be. And that means, that this is going to fall on your lap. And is that okay? And he usually is. And then, but sometimes he's also a really good judge for me. And I don't know if your husband is as well as what's too much, like, is this something that we should say yes to, or is this an opportunity that's just going to be too much on our plate? And it's going to spread you too thin or pull you from the things you love. Has he ever kind of set those limits for you? Because sometimes our loved ones see that better than we do.
it's happened a few times when I've gotten frustrated or disillusioned with activities. He said, well, if it's not making you happy, then don't do it. Or, when it became an issue of trying to decide if I wanted to pursue more leadership positions or things like that, it's a balancing act. And it's not necessarily that he discourages me from doing it. He just wants me to make sure that what I'm doing is going to give me joy rather than frustration.
Right. And build towards whatever it is that you're building towards or whatever your goal is, and not just be more busy work on your plate. Yeah, sometimes that's, I think, the hardest part, I think, especially when you're busy. So I know that there was sort of this time in your 30s because you got married later at the age of 40, where we've talked about like that stress that you felt to start a family and not be single. And I certainly have a lot of friends who are in a similar situation where they're in their 30s and they're not married and they're sort of feeling this stress, like this cultural pull, like you should fit into this box, you should find a partner and start a family. What was that like for you? Did you feel that stress? Was everyone constantly asking you questions about when that was going to happen, or were you putting that on yourself at all?
Both and all of the above. So this is my second marriage actually. And so my first marriage was a more traditional marriage and I was married when I was 21. And so my first husband was who I was married to throughout med school and for part of residency. And once I decided I wanted to go into surgery, he point blank told me, well, I can't be married to a surgeon. And so I think it was 2.5 years into general surgery when we finally bit the bullet and got divorced. And that was kind of,
Wow.
I knew it was going to happen because it wasn't working.
Yeah.
Because back in those days, it was pre 80-hour work weeks. And so I was doing 120 hours a week or whatnot, and every other night call. And that wasn't working well. And his mom would get upset because I couldn't make the bed. Like, I don't know how the horror stories transpired, but you also have to understand my first husband was Indian. So it was a more
Mhm.
traditional Indian dynamic. So my ex-mother-in-law would call my mother and complain about how I was such an awful wife because I didn't make the bed and I didn't cook dinner for my husband. And those kinds of more traditional demands were being
Right.
placed on me, which I didn't do. And then the other conflict occurred because there was a lot of pressure to get pregnant at that point in time. And I was very committed to the fact at that point that I was not going to have children until I was done with my training.
Sure.
And that, because to me in those days, I didn't know anybody who'd ever had a baby in the middle of residency. I mean, it just wasn't something you did, that as far as I could see around me. And so we got divorced. And then once after that happened, at first I was okay with it. I'm totally happy with it. And then when I finished my residency, I thought, oh, now it's time for me to get married and have babies, right? Because that's the normal flow of things. And by that time, I was 34 years old, and I can't tell you how many blind dates and how many internet, eHarmony and all Match.com that I did, thinking that that was going to make me happy, right? I really bought into the fact that the only way I was going to be happy was if I had a traditional family structure with a husband and babies. And my career totally took a total backseat at that point. Like, yes, I did do a fellowship and I did have my job, but none of those seemed important to me because my value system was all based on the only way I'm going to be a good person is if I'm a wife and mother. And it was when I went to one of the WPS retreats back in 2007, where I met Barb Davies and Beth Peterson, who are both very well accomplished female plastic surgeons who have never been married. And to me, that was very eye-opening. Like, oh, it's totally normal. You don't have to follow that route.
So you feel like, did you guys have like a conversation, or did you just see them and for the first time you had actually seen a living example that it could be different?
Both. I just remember sitting in the lobby with talking to Barb about it and just being so fascinated that she had a normal experience as a single woman. And so both talking and just the ability to see other people.
It's amazing how when we don't see something, we don't even know it exists as women, right? Like when we don't even see women in leadership, we don't even think of ourselves in those shoes. Just like seeing you and doing all of these leadership things, it had never occurred to me that I could do all that as a woman and a mother. And then I see you doing that and managing that, and that's just such a crazy example. And it's the same for, your family situation, that you had to see that before you could kind of be okay and at peace with that. Going back to when you were saying your ex-husband was telling you he couldn't be married to a surgeon, what is that like? I mean, do you second guess yourself? I mean, you have to, because this is the person that you love and is supposed to support you more than anything in the world. And if they don't believe that you can do it, how the heck do you believe in yourself?
So it was very, very difficult because I had it coming at me from all fronts, right? Nobody was really supportive of me being a surgeon. My husband at the time, my in-laws. And then, to be honest, I tried to do an integrated match when I was a fourth year medical student. And back in those days, there were like 50 spots, and I didn't match that year. And so everybody turned that around to tell me, well, see, now you don't have to be a surgeon. Now you can get pregnant and go do a family medicine internship, right? So it was a total battle of trying to fight that. And I think it actually just made me more determined to do it and prove everybody wrong, is the honest to God truth.
Yeah, it's awesome. But we tell ourselves that stuff, like things fail and we have this sort of imposter syndrome as women. And when things don't go the way that they're supposed to, or we don't have the best possible outcome, I think we're the hardest on ourselves. And we tell ourselves, well, see, you weren't supposed to get there, or, you didn't do well on this test because you're not qualified enough. And good for you for finding that inner determination in a situation like that, because I think so many people would have just kind of clung to that and said, well, I can't lose that. This is my marriage and I can't lose that over this career choice. And so I'm going to change myself. So that takes a lot of guts and courage.
Well, I think it's also important that we remember that unless we are happy with who we are and with what we're doing as individuals and as women, we're never going to be able to take good care of others or to provide good care, both personally and professionally. I think you really have to come from a place where you are happy with who you are, and doing something that you don't want to do is not going to make you happy.
No, yeah, it's incredible to hear. I mean, we see that in our patients too, right? Like even doing anything to our patients that gives them self-confidence or makes them feel good about themselves. It's amazing because those women who walk into our offices post-operatively, they're different than the woman who comes in before and feels bad about doing something for herself or has a lot of guilt. And I think we see that in our patients as well. And we all have a story that sort of can help us relate. How was your dad through all of this, right? Because you have this amazing father who's also a microsurgeon, and I didn't grow up in a family with anyone in medicine. So I'm always so curious as to what it's like to, have a father like that. What kind of pressure did you feel? Because I imagine as a self-starter kind of type A personality, you put a lot of stress on yourself to be like dad. What was that like? And was he supportive of all of that?
So my father is a plastic surgeon, and initially when I decided I wanted to pursue a career in plastic surgery, he was also very concerned because he also envisioned me as having a traditional family, and he was concerned that with a surgical career I would not be able to have a family. And he point blank told me that as a medical student, that I will never be able to have a family if I pursue a surgical career. So it wasn't just my ex-husband and my in-laws. My father was also not very encouraging about that at the time. And I think that that has really changed over the years, because he did want me to be a physician, but he wanted me to pursue something that was going to be more family friendly. And
Mm-hmm.
initially, my parents also envisioned that I would have a traditional family. And I think that over the years, now that they've seen how Trevor and I make it work, I think they're very supportive, because Trevor even takes care of them. If my parents
Yeah, of
live,
course.
like,
Yeah.
they live a block away, and so if their
Yeah.
garage door is broken, guess who goes over there to help them out?
Mm-hmm.
If my dad has a flat and is stranded, guess who goes over there, right?
Yeah.
So now today, it's a very different situation than it was 20 years ago, where my parents were very convinced that I needed to get married and have children and have a traditional family. Whereas now that they see that Trevor and I are happy and we have the balance, they're very supportive. And along those lines, initially, my father had been very hesitant about me doing a microsurgery fellowship for the same reasons, right? Why am I prolonging my training when my biological clock is ticking and I should be getting married and having babies? And now that over the past 10 to 15 years, because I worked with my dad for many years and he would assist me on my deep flaps, that gave him something that he would never have had if I hadn't done that fellowship. So it's the progression, and everybody grows with it. So it wasn't anything that everybody was 100% supportive of initially. It was something we had to grow into.
Yeah. Yeah. That's remarkable. How do you remember perceiving him as a kid, growing up with a dad as a plastic surgeon? Was he busy all the time? Were you a kid who was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to do this because dad's never home? Or was he sort of like your hero and you always kind of had in your gut that maybe that was going to be the path for you too?
I just thought what he did was kind of cool. I
Yeah.
remember rounding with him at the hospital, like when you go to the
Yeah.
hospital and the nurses take those gloves and blow them up into five-fingered balloons.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I remember watching him do a rhinoplasty when I was 15 and nearly passing out. And at that point in time, I was like, well, if I passed out doing a rhinoplasty, I guess I can never be a surgeon.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you kind of thought you liked it. You were interested from when you were really young. And then how did you kind of make that call to pursue medicine, or did you always had
So,
that?
well, I thought I wanted to be a writer initially.
Well, you're good at that. So that's,
That
yeah.
was my dream, was to write for the New York Times. I'm still hoping one day I'll do that. But I ultimately decided to go to medical school for multiple different reasons. One was that I was too scared to try to do it as a writer, whereas I knew medicine
Yeah.
would be a more reliable profession. And I really do enjoy thinking and doing things. And I was committed to doing something that was involved with women's health. And in those days, I think women's health was a budding specialty. And at the University of Pittsburgh, where I went to medical school, they had just started a specialty program in women's health specifically. So you could do internal medicine and then segue into a 2-year fellowship in women's health. And I don't know if they still have that or not.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought I was going to do. And then in med school, I realized I'm not really a medicine kind of person. I'm more of a surgical. I mean, you learn that you're either a surgeon personality or a medical personality, right?
Yeah.
Surgeons are multitaskers. They do a lot of things. They take action. In medicine, it's a different type of work. And so I just fell in love with surgery.
Yeah, good for you. I always wonder what my kids are going to think. Like, do they think it's cool? Do they think it's gross? Are they annoyed because they're playing in the basement right now and mommy's on a podcast? I didn't grow up in that family. And so I'm always so interested to talk to people like you who grew up with medicine in the household to see what that's like and what my kids' perception of that's going to be. Hopefully they'll think it's cool.
I think they'll think it's cool. And, honestly, I don't know that people think about it that much. Like, I just didn't think about it. My dad would leave a dinner party. Oh, he's on call. He had an emergency. Oh,
Yeah.
because, he did a lot of hand trauma, and it was just Pops had an emergency,
Yeah.
It was just something you accepted.
Yeah, I guess I never even thought about it like that. My father owned a family business. They were Italian immigrants, his family, and they were butchers. And so they owned a family business and they worked nonstop. So certainly a very different career and lifestyle, but we used to open gifts on Christmas at 6 a.m. so that he could go and open the store at 7. And we never thought anything of it. So I guess it's true. It's just their world. They don't know any differently, and they know what it means to be on call and to do a podcast after. And yeah, they know how to set up the computer and the microphone and the ring light and how to bribe mommy so that they can be quiet and get surprises at the end of it all. Well, your family situation has been tough. You guys have been through a lot. And, as a blended family like that, that's a lot to take on. I know that there's been a lot of medical issues with your son. What was that like? And how did you balance a busy career while you guys were, and still are kind of dealing with that?
So Trevor has 4 boys, and we have 4 boys. And when we got married, that was probably the biggest issue, was that while the oldest of the boys when we got married was 17 and the youngest was 5. And the biggest issue or concern was that what is it going to mean to be a stepmother to these kids who also have their own health concerns and so on. So Turner, who is not the youngest, Gavin is the youngest, and he's still living at home. But he'll be 25 in September, and he is a 3-time cancer survivor. So I was not married to Trevor during the whole cancer treatment process. He had his 3rd bout just before Trevor and I started dating. So fortunately, he's been cancer-free, and he had the routine medical examinations and stuff. But that's just been a struggle because his biological mother is also very protective of him, obviously, because of everything he's gone through. So it creates a different dynamic because she's never fully trusted me, to be honest. And Turner's doing well. He has a seizure disorder. And I think balancing things on my end has just always been to be very supportive of my husband and all the fears that he's had and all the scares that we have periodically related to Turner's health, because they do come up whenever you have a child with any type of illness like that. Even though he's cancer free, you have scares and you have issues like you're like, oh my God, is it back? Or what's going to happen now? And you just have to kind of go through it one day at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a lot to take on for someone who had come to peace with not having this traditional family and maybe not having children and focusing on your career, and then to fall in love with someone who comes with all these sort of unique situations, which obviously have made you a better and stronger person, and I'm sure a better physician all around. But was that scary?
It was terrifying. I didn't think we were going to make it. I mean, we've had a lot of issues in our marriage over the years, and I mean, probably not more than anybody. If you're going to make a marriage work, it
Yeah.
always takes give and take.
Marriage is marriage. Yeah.
But a lot of the issues initially were related to the children. I think the first 3 years were very, very tough because of that, because there was always something happening with one of the kids, whether it was Turner and his past or whether it was the other issues we've dealt with. We've also dealt with drug and drug addiction issues in our family with the kids and those kinds of concerns. And they can really destroy relationships, but you have to work through it.
Yeah. And I mean, as parents, when we deal with things with our kids and we've gone through health scares with our son, it seems hard to imagine coming in as a stepmother and assuming all of the anxiety and the drama that comes with handling all those things. So I honestly can't even imagine what it was like for you to like knowingly walk into that. It's just a completely different dynamic. And I think families who don't deal with any of these adversities, I mean, first of all, amazing, great. Also, I think it's hard to understand just how deep all of this goes. And I'm sure your husband is so incredibly grateful to have a partner like you who was able to be his teammate to deal with all of this.
It's definitely a process. And I'll be honest, I don't think I realized what I was getting into, but I think that
Maybe better.
that's probably for the
Yeah.
better. But I also have no regrets because I think I'm definitely a better person today than I was 13 years ago. And I think having dealt with the issues we've dealt with and trying to be a decent mother to the boys, despite everything, has made me a better person and probably a better doctor and all that other kind of stuff. Because
It
I'd never,
does.
if without those experiences, I wouldn't be who I am.
You don't know what it's like to be on the other side of it unless you're on the other side. You just don't. You don't know what it's like to be the parent in the waiting room waiting for the updates or any of those things, or to have that anxiety that you talk about when something happens. There's
Yeah.
just that little tick in your heart that is like, okay, is this it? Is today the day? Is waiting for something bad to happen.
You never know. And I think it was in 2016 when Turner had a seizure and they called Trevor from work and he ran to work to pick him up. And in Trevor's mind, he was going through like, oh my God, his brain tumor's back because the last time
Mhm.
he was diagnosed, he had had a seizure and that's the way he presented. And I remember like, oh shit, what am I going to do if this is what it is? And we were convinced, but I also remember being in the ER. And this, of course, happened the first week of July. And you're at a university hospital in an ER with a kid who's got a history of things. And the resident or intern or whoever was doing the intake was not the brightest. And I can't tell you how frustrated I got. And I was like, let me talk to your attending. I mean,
Yeah.
then you start just going into doctor mode. Like
Yes.
you're like, this
Yeah.
is ridiculous. This isn't working.
Yeah, you have to advocate for your kids. I think that's like the upside of being in medicine and having medically complex kids is that they're lucky to have us because we can root for the best doctor or the best team or the best surgeon and make sure that their care is VIP care as it should be. But we're lucky in that way. But also it's almost a double-edged sword because you probably understand so much more about this stuff than your husband. So it's almost probably more of a burden on you because you know what it means when they say very serious things and what those implications are. And sometimes throughout my son's history, I've sometimes wished I was a little more naive.
Naivete is sometimes pleasant, or not knowing, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gets us through it. So now that the kids are getting older, so there's just one in the house, talk a little bit about how you guys have made time for your relationship, because obviously, even though these aren't your biological children, you guys have a really busy life with kind of a lot of stuff going on. How throughout your marriage have you made time for each other or carved that out? Like, is there any structure to it or has it changed throughout the years?
it's changed over the years. So he's a teacher and a coach, and so his mornings start early, and he's coached his entire time that we've been married. And obviously, I work, and so we're morning people. And it used to be that we would run when it wasn't cross country season. we made an effort to at least run together 2 days a week and
That's
2 or 3
awesome.
days a week. And that's nice. It's time where you're just with your spouse and we would talk to one another, and it was a very supportive relationship with the running. And obviously I have not been running late this past year because I had a knee injury.
Yeah.
And so that's been less organized. The other way, I think, to be honest, is we have to get away. Like we like going to Colorado and going hiking, or over Labor Day weekend, we're going to go to Miraval. And we usually go to Miraval once or twice a year, just the two of
Hmm.
us. And the first time I ever took Trevor, I was like, oh my God, he's going to get so bored. He's going to hate going to the spa. What man goes to the spa? But it's a really nice time. Just, it's a nice couples getaway that you can go to for 3 or 4 days and spend some time together.
Yeah, that's exciting. Maybe we'll come with you. My husband would go to a spa. That sounds wonderful. So you guys do that. Did you do like a weekly date night or, movie night or anything like that?
Yeah, when the kids were at home,
Yeah.
like initially when all the boys were at home, because there was a period of time when 3 of the boys were living with us full time, we
Yeah.
always had a minimum of one date night a week.
Yeah. You
Um,
have to. Yeah.
it's been a while since that's the case. And now Gavin's 17, it's not as big of a deal, right? And then with COVID over the past year, I think we quit going out that much. So now it's hard to
Yeah.
get back into that habit.
Yeah. It's so important. We started doing that after my daughter, my second, was born, because we didn't even have time to talk to each other. We'd have these super busy days and there were so many things I wanted to talk to him about all day. And then you'd get home and you do dinner and you do dishes and you do bath and then you do bedtime. And then I was exhausted. I didn't want to talk to anyone anymore. And so it was Groundhog's Day every day. And so soon thereafter, I think at a WPS meeting, I talked to somebody about, doing a date night. And I was like, we need to put that on the schedule. Like that's a thing. And so even when I was in academics, if there were meetings on that day, and still, on the doodle poll, I am not available on date night because it's important and I have to protect it because no one else is.
Right. And if you don't protect it, no one
No.
will. And no one else, nobody that's at that meeting knows that you gave up an evening with your husband and there's no other night this week where you can go hang out together. And so that's why,
Mm-mm.
as women, we have to realize there's no guilt associated with saying no to something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really hard. That's truly the hardest thing, but you have to set those limits because then we become overworked and overburdened and we lose that delicate balance and we can't do our jobs. We can't take care of other people if we're not taking care of ourselves. It sounds like you have just an absolutely awesome home situation and totally not what you intended or where you probably ever thought you would be, but holy cow, it's made you who you are, which is just this incredibly awesome person and just such a successful plastic surgeon. It's a new time, right? There's like so many women coming into our field. We know over half of med school is women, and we see more and more women matriculating into these surgical subspecialties like plastics. And gratefully, we're hearing different stories. We're hearing women who maybe are just having children on their own and they're not getting married, or people who are freezing their eggs because they're worrying about their career now and they're going to do something a little bit differently or in a little bit non-traditional. For all these women entering our fields, and based on your experience, what kind of advice or kind of closing remarks do you have for these diverse women who are the future of plastic surgery?
I think there's no right way to go about doing things. What's right for you may not be what's right for me. So we have to accept our individuality and accept that there's going to be a right course that's going to work for you, that's going to allow you to be successful. The course that I took, it may seem convoluted to others, but I do truly believe it was the right course for me because it has allowed me to have a great family, a great, awesome, loving husband, and a great career. And I think that if I had followed through on my original path of a more traditional family, I truly believe that I wouldn't be here where I am today. And
Yeah.
so I think as people and as individuals and as women and as surgeons, and we have to be accepting that everybody's going to find their own path, and we have to be supportive of how they do it and encourage them to find their own path, not necessarily to follow my path or your path or the other person's path. And if that means having babies early, great. If that means freezing your eggs, great. If that means having a traditional family or not, it's an individual choice, and we have to embrace it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that you said tonight that really sticks with me is that we have to find what gives us joy. And I think sometimes we're so busy, we kind of forget that that's really the most important thing, whether it's at work or at home or what it is that we say yes to or say no to. You know, if it's going to bring us joy, then like Marie Kondo says, we should keep it. And
Exactly.
if it doesn't, it goes out. It's really that simple. And that allows for every answer under the sun, like as diverse as you want to be. If it brings you joy and then that's what you want to do, then that's okay. That's the right answer for you. So I think that that's really, really awesome advice. Well, Anu, this was really fun. The next time we do this, we need to do it with a glass of wine, but
Oh, I agree.
yeah, I loved hearing more about your amazing and sort of diverse family situation. And I know that there's so many things that you've shared with us today that is going to resonate with all of our listeners out there. So thank you again. Thank you for being so honest and candid about such very personal things. I think that, you know, this wouldn't work without that. So thank you again for tuning in to our Limitless Allergan Leadership Podcast. So please subscribe to our podcast series, and we look forward to having you on board for future podcasts. And we have quite a few exciting seasons planned. So stay tuned and tuned in. Thank you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.